What if I told you there's a business where you can spend $2 billion, wait 15 years, fail 90% of the time, and still become one of the richest people on the planet? That's not a scam. That's not a fantasy. That's the actual business model of owning a pharmaceutical company. And today, I'm going to break down exactly how the economics work, why it's designed this way, and why almost nobody actually understands it. Let's start with the number that scares everyone away. It costs, on average, $2.6 billion to bring a single new drug to market. Not a company, not a portfolio, one drug. And here's the part that makes investors sweat. Out of every 10 drugs that enter clinical trials, roughly 9 of them fail. They fail in animal testing. They fail in human trials. They fail after years of research, after hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes right before the finish line. So why would anyone in their right mind pour money into something with a 90% failure rate? Because the one drug that succeeds doesn't just make its money back. It makes back the cost of all 9 failures, plus a profit margin most industries can only dream of. Think about it like this. Imagine you're playing a slot machine, except this slot machine costs you $200 million every single pull. Most pulls, you lose everything. But every 10th pull or so, the machine doesn't just pay out. It pays out $20 billion. That's the pharmaceutical industry. It's not a business. It's a high-stakes probability game where the winners cover for everyone who lost. Now here's where it gets interesting, and this is the part most people never learn in school. Once a company actually gets a drug approved, the government hands them something incredibly powerful, a patent. For 20 years, that company has an exclusive legal monopoly. No competitor can sell the same drug. No competitor can undercut the price. For 2 decades, that company can charge whatever the market, or more accurately, whatever insurance companies and desperate patients are willing to pay. This is why you'll see a pill that costs 3 cents to manufacture being sold for $300. It's not because the ingredients are expensive. It's because the patent gives the company total pricing control, and healthcare, unlike almost every other market, is famously inelastic. People don't shop around for cheaper insulin when they're dying. They pay what's asked, or their insurance pays what's asked, and the company profits either way. But here's the twist nobody talks about. The patent clock is always ticking, and that changes everything about how these companies behave. The moment a drug launches, executives are already thinking about what happens when the patent expires. Because when it does, generic manufacturers flood in overnight, and prices can crash by 80 or 90% within a year. This is called the patent cliff, and it is the single most terrifying phrase in the pharmaceutical boardroom. So what do companies do? They race against their own clock. They tweak the formula slightly and call it a new version, filing for a new patent. This is called evergreening, and it's one of the most quietly controversial practices in the entire industry. They buy up smaller biotech startups that have promising drugs still in the pipeline, because it's often cheaper to acquire innovation than to build it from scratch. This is why you'll see massive pharmaceutical giants spending $40, $50, sometimes $80 billion just to acquire a company with a single promising drug candidate. It sounds insane until you realize they're not buying a company. They're buying 20 years of future monopoly pricing. Now let's talk about where the real money actually goes, because this surprises almost everyone. You'd assume the biggest expense for a pharmaceutical company is research. It's not. For most major pharmaceutical companies, marketing and sales spending is actually larger than research and development spending. Larger. Think about that. The industry that claims to exist for scientific breakthroughs spends more money convincing doctors to prescribe their drugs and convincing you that you need them than it spends discovering them in the first place. This is why you see pharmaceutical sales representatives visiting doctors' offices with lunch, gifts, and glossy brochures. This is why you see direct-to-consumer advertising, which, by the way, is only legal in 2 countries in the entire world, the United States and New Zealand. Every other country bans it, because it turns medicine into a marketing category instead of a medical decision. Here's another economic trick that keeps these companies wildly profitable. Drug pricing is almost never based on what it costs to make the drug. It's based on what's called value-based pricing. Essentially, how much money or suffering the drug saves a patient over their lifetime, and then the company prices just under that value. If a drug prevents a $100,000 surgery, the company might price it at $80,000. Not because it costs $80,000 to produce, because that number sits just under what the alternative would have cost you anyway. It's not about the product. It's about the value trapped inside your desperation to stay alive. And once a pharmaceutical company hits scale, the economics turn into an absolute machine. Because after the initial research investment is paid off, manufacturing additional pills is unbelievably cheap. We're talking profit margins of 80, 90, sometimes over 95% on individual drugs once development costs are recovered. There are very few industries on Earth, outside of software, where a physical product can carry margins like that. This is also why the biggest pharmaceutical companies are almost never founded by a lone scientist in a garage. They're built by financiers, deal makers, and executives who understand risk portfolios better than they understand chemistry. Because owning one drug is a gamble. Owning 50 drug candidates across different disease categories, different phases of trials, different patent timelines, that's not gambling anymore. That's insurance. That's diversification. If 9 out of 10 drugs fail, but you own 100 drugs in your pipeline, statistically, you're going to hit enough winners to keep the empire running forever. So when you strip away the lab coats, the white buildings, and the mission statements about improving human health, what you're actually looking at is one of the most sophisticated risk and monopoly businesses ever built. Massive failure rates offset by government-granted exclusivity. Enormous marketing budgets that often outweigh the science. Pricing based not on cost, but on how much you need the product to survive. And an entire portfolio strategy designed to make sure that even when 90% of your bets lose, the 10% that win are worth more than all your losses combined. That's not a coincidence. That's the entire design. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. If you want to understand how the next industry hides its economics in plain sight, make sure you're subscribed, because we're breaking one down every single week.